Right, here on the main stage, it's time for our second panel discussion. I'm skipping the interlude act, so I'm going to move around the furniture whilst I introduce you. We're going to talk about designing with communities. It's communities where the action happens. It's where the behaviour change necessary... Sorry, I have messed up my script. It's where the behaviour change necessary to shift a regenerative future lies. Co-design with communities is an essential part of Design for Planet. So Almira Hussain is the Greater London Authority's Principal Policy Officer for Innovation and Collaboration, where she runs the Mayor's Open Innovation Challenges, breaking down traditional silos and creating opportunities for cross-sector collaboration to help tackle some of London's biggest problems. Almira started her career as a community organiser within London's refugee communities, and she co-founded a refugee education programme and innovation agency for social and environmental good. She's going to lead a conversation now with some pioneering professional and community designers from across the nations. Almira, over to you to introduce your panel.
Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be here. Yeah, come take a seat, guys. Let's chat. Very excited to be here today. I think before I introduce my panel, which I'm thrilled to do, I'm really conscious that we're currently at an event about designing for the planet, and we're talking about community movement and collaboration. I know that a lot of us right now are probably really distracted and preoccupied by the conflict that's happening in Palestine and Israel. And I just want to say that our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts go out to all those that are affected by the conflict. So, to my left, I have Amahra Spence. Their bios are all very impressive, so I would like to take the time to do this as well. Amahra Spence is a cultural worker and spatial practitioner exploring liberation. Guided by lineages of Black imagination, spatial justice, and more than human accountabilities, she is particularly interested in how transformation is practiced through narrative, design, space, systems, strategy, and governance, growing new cultures of possibility. Amahra is the founding director of MAIA, an organization in relationship with artists and communities to rehearse liberation into being. MAIA prototype life-affirming infrastructures across 3 mission strands: sites of imagination, resourcing the movement, and culture and liberation. Then I have Marie Williams. Marie Williams is a playful chartered engineer, design lecturer, TEDx speaker, and CEO of Dream Networks. Her design practice is situated in communities and focuses on designing in a circular, regenerative, and culturally resilient manner. In 2016, she founded Dream Networks and has collaborated with businesses, schools, and communities to co-design and build engaging play spaces in economically deprived communities around the world. To date, Dream Networks has adopted sustainable design practices to create inclusive play spaces for over 60,000 children in the UK and Africa. Marie is an advocate for children's rights to change the spaces they inhabit through play and design practices that prioritize the needs of the community and the environment. Through her PhD at the UCL Institute of Global Prosperity within the Bartlett School of Architecture, she has developed a critical blueprint for cultivating sustainable outdoor play spaces in urban poor communities through co-design and a deep understanding of place and materiality. She has lectured on design, innovation, and sustainability at renowned universities in the UK, Kenya, and the USA, such as Bristol University and Yale. Last but not least, we have Arthur Perez. Arthur is the co-founder of The Village, a social organization on a mission to prepare communities for the changes of a warming climate. They design and manage physical spaces which aggregate all things sustainable under one roof for communities and organizations to build climate and social resilience. The Village aims to build a blueprint for an equal, sustainable, and regenerative way of living under one roof. They are part of the Design Differently program led by the Design Council. Arthur has over 10 years of experience in communication and marketing, building his career in agencies and as Depop's head of brand marketing. He started The Village with his partner after the birth of his child to build the future she deserves. So, welcome to my panelists. I wanted to begin by setting the scene and learning a bit more about our panelists and how they got into the positions they are in now. And I think maybe, Arthur, I'll start with you. As I just mentioned, you previously were more in the corporate world, doing branding and marketing. What led you to creating the village? Was there a catalyst moment? I know you spoke about your daughter, and are there any things that you brought with you from your previous professional experiences into the creation of the village?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it's one day. It's March 2019, when I started my depression. I think it's the moment where I knew for a very long time the climate crisis existed, but it's the date where it landed emotionally, where I knew the future is going to be worse than the past. And that obviously put me into turmoil, and I just needed to act. Well, I couldn't for 2 years, so I went into a place that was important for me was activism. I spent a lot of time in the streets, and at some point I realized that this wasn't enough. I wanted to be, whilst there is a very clear need, and we need activism, and I am supporting, for example, the current climate action happening today, Oily Money Out, which I really think it's something fantastic, and if you've got time, please go. There is, and for me, it was the moment where I realized I need to be for a project, and that moment coincided with the birth of my daughter, where I realized, if you remember the chart we just saw, when she will be 70, it's not going to be a beautiful place for her to live in. So it was the moment for me, I was like, okay, great about all of this. You feel better mentally, so now it's important for you to get involved into something that has meaning and purpose for the future.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's really powerful. Marie, you have quite the background in many different things, and this was like a third of what we covered when we chatted before. I'd love to know your journey in terms of creating dream networks.
To be honest, similar to Arthur, my journey started with children. So my background is in pretty technical. I was an aerospace engineer, and I wanted to do work with communities. And I think I mainly wanted to do that because you can do, well, the aerospace industry, in reality, when you work in it, you're a bit of a clog in a large gear, or whatever you want to use as an analogy. And I wanted to see how I could work with a community to do good. So it was a bit altruistic at the beginning. And then when I met with them, I was like, I'm an aerospace engineer, I'm super cool, and what would you like me to do? And this was a community in Tanzania, and they asked me to design a play space. I think I've told this story to quite a few people today. And I said, actually, like, again, I'm an aerospace engineer. But I did, so I went there, and I've always been somebody who designs, and even probably decided to be an engineer was in response to a need, to a problem I saw. And they really highlighted the need for play, but also a need to understand the materiality associated with play. If we believe play spaces should always look like a UK playground, or I love McDonald's, sorry everybody, don't eat it anymore, but I used to love McDonald's. But if you think it should look like a McDonald's playground or any form like that, how it limits people in that context. So working with them to co-design, before it became a buzzword or a word a lot of us used, just to be honest, it was actually realizing them as users, the people affected, had a different form of materiality associated with play, and what can we design? And that's what transformed my thinking. So that's why it all started, with children, materials, and an aerospace engineer who likes play.
Love it. And Amahra, MAIA is really focused on creativity in the arts, and I'd love to understand your journey to creating that and why bringing in creativity in the arts within kind of a collaborative space and design space is so important to you.
Thank you. You're going to have to shut me up because I get excited about this subject. So if I'm like, okay, because there are basically like three main lineages, I guess, that sat beneath my journey with MAIA. One was my background was in youth work and community work, so that type of immersion and being witness to the wonder and the absolute chaos of children was a real integral part of my journey. The second is I am an absolutely massive hip-hop nerd, huge. And for me, growing up, I always understood that hip-hop had a kind of analysis of its built environment. It was a critique of the built environment. Like the origins of hip hop were literally resistance and critique of the built environment. And that really informed my spatial practice, my spatial politics. I learnt about gentrification and the politics of displacement first through hip hop before anything else. even though many, you know, hip hop artists, musicians, producers probably wouldn't use that language. It was baked into their art form. And then the third, but definitely not least, I am my granddad's granddaughter. And my granddad, at any given moment, Kat is probably fed up of hearing me talk about my granddad, but at any given moment I talk about my granddad, the first storyteller that I ever knew, the first artist that I ever knew, he would never call himself such. You know, his house was the first community centre that I ever knew. He would never say that. But for me, he came here in 1960, like many of the Windrush generation. He landed slap bang in the middle of the West Midlands in a place called Wednesbury. If anybody knows that, I am astounded. But Wednesbury is one of the teeny tiny towns that makes up what we call the Black Country. So it has this really long history, a significant part of the Industrial Revolution. We call it the Black Country because of the smoke that was in the air, not because of the people. But this idea of that smoke and what that did to our literal soil, you know, I always say my granddad, he landed in one of the most toxic places. He experienced racism, like, yeah, almost to a profound degree. And in that space, he built an oasis. He built this house that was the most convivial, joyful, loving space that I'd ever witnessed. And to this day, it still is that. So for me, the question was, how would I build infrastructure in the spirit of Granddad's house? Was the live question that helped me set up MAIA.
That's amazing. I love that you were so influenced by hip hop, and I'm curious to our other panelists, you know, are there any unconventional things that you're often kind of influenced by or inspired by that wouldn't necessarily be directly related to your work?
Yeah, personally, I'm definitely inspired by the need for uniformity. So this sounds odd. So when I go to the toilet and I see like different toilet handles, I'm always interested. I'm like, finally a different toilet handle. Why is this designed this way? Why is it that manner? And I think that really brings to a lot of the work we do at Dream Networks. It's co-designing to say, actually, we don't need to be uniform. We need to create something that works. And obviously, some door handles, I could talk about door handles for long, but some door handles don't actually fully work. And maybe they look aesthetically pleasing, but in terms of functionality, it's not good. And that's the same with play. I see the same paradox that occurs. Some door handles look, yeah, like they've been there from the 1960s, but they work beautifully. That's why adventure play has a space in our society today. So yeah, I think I get inspiration from design and functions that aren't uniform, but they work or don't work.
I will never look at door handles the same way again.
Good.
I'm done. Arthur, how about yourself?
I think I don't have anything unconventional, unfortunately. I just love to observe. I think we discussed earlier spotting what's invisible, or just, I think for me, is always looking at a space and trying to understand the power dynamics that exist through the influence of design. And I think that's something that sometimes asking the question of what is the dome that we're currently living under, and that is forcing our actions? What is a culture that is giving us norms, values, symbols that are forcing us to act in a certain way? So that's the way I'm always questioning through that angle, and I think we're going to be exploring some of the question of system design. So, but yeah, that's something that I'm always fascinated by and always trying to learn more out.
Amazing. Thank you. So I think now let's talk a bit more about designing with communities and collaboration. You know, I think for many of us in attendance, inclusive of me, I've actually started a new role that's all about collaboration, and so this is a learning point for me as well. You know, we'd love to learn some tips and tricks and do's and don'ts in terms of how to do this from yourselves as practitioners. So I'd love to understand, you know, what considerations do you feel are most important when designing programs which involve collaboration with communities? And if you can tell us this kind of through an example of any success stories when designing sustainable solutions, and what made it successful, and what were your key takeaways. Maybe we'll start with you, Amahra.
This feels like a huge question. And I almost just want to loop it back a little bit, because I realised I didn't fully respond to the actual question that you asked. And I just want to zoom back to the context of the art world that I entered when I started my journey as an artist about 15 years ago. The art world, we have this thing where we say in the art world, we know how to steal, we know how to extract, we know how to hoard, and we know how to sell it back to you. And so that was the system that I entered into, and obviously it just felt icky. But that thing of, for me, artists were a part of that really colonial kind of paradigm, or were used in that paradigm. And so the reason that MAIA really came about was I noticed that paradigm, and then I also noticed we could talk about artists in the sense of they make people feel good, or they make people feel better. I saw this a lot in COVID. We're really good at entertaining you, or we're really good for your well-being. And I still felt, look at that, like, extractive, we know how to take from you when it makes us feel good sort of paradigm. And I didn't just want us to feel better. I didn't just want, us to have these, like, almost hacks where we have the feelings of feeling good. This TV show makes me feel really good, and that's enough. Because also I think there's something about, actually, we need to sit with what is uncomfortable, and we need to sit with what hurts, and we need to be much more comfortable with feeling. And sometimes art is used as a distraction rather than a feeling. But for me, I wanted structural change. Like, I wanted transformation at the root. I wanted a reimagining of those radical conditions, and it's radical different precedents that we needed for that. So for me, thinking about the sort of precedents, our work was about how do we grow then personal, structural, and sustained capacities where people come together to imagine something else, imagine other possibilities, imagine new systems and structures. One very brief example, just because it's one of my favorite things to talk about, which actually isn't a MAIA example. I'm an organizer for Land and Spatial Justice in another hat, but everything uses culture for me. And as a hip-hop nerd, I developed this project where we use hip-hop and generative AI. We work with children and young people, and they design hip-hop responsive architectures. We 3D print them, we map them all out. We're having the most sophisticated, advanced, incredible creative conversations about architecture and urban planning, and we don't use that language until right at the end of that process. So they don't know that they've been planners, for 6 months. They don't know that we've been having a conversation specifically about architecture when they entered into the process. But by the end of it, they start understanding that world building is a practice that they are already invested in. We've already moved beyond that. How do we engage with they're in it? Not only are they in it, they're leading it. And that's been such an incredible process. And I guess my main learning through all of my work has been how easy it is to default to infantilizing communities. I think that's one of the biggest things for me. We go straight there and we make all of the assumptions. We come in as experts, and everything for me has been about cultivating a new posture. I think I'm going to end here, but I think there's something about the scale of change that we're in. It feels so destabilizing, alienated. We disconnect from our bodies. But the thing for me is, like, in order to stay with the body, in order to stay with what is, oh God, I've lost what I was going to say. No,
so good.
My brain went somewhere else.
You got it.
My brain went somewhere else. Basically, I think there is a line between that, like, the action that we need to take, we need to do everything now, and overwhelm. And for me, that line is humility. Like, that's the space. And I think we need to practice new postures of humility.
It's amazing. We'll probably get into more when we speak about the systems. I'd love to learn more about that and how do we, really prioritize and champion diverse voices, and how to do it in a very equitable way. Because I think, as you referred to earlier, Marie, that, a lot of us are talking about co-design, and it's getting a bit zeitgeisty. I've seen it used in, like, very not so great spaces. But before we get there, I would love to know, Marie, from yourself, like a success story where you feel you've been able to demonstrate, really important factors and considerations when designing programs.
Yeah, I think, kind of speaking to Amara's point, often it's when you go into environments, so we work with businesses, schools, and communities, and we run essentially like design programs that are STEAM. So some people in the world know what STEAM means, but it's basically science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And we start with children as young as 7, because we believe that to affect change and to enable people to be design partners and co-design, they need to have some core principles. And the designer's principles of being able to empathize, be able to understand the environment, understand the need. A child can gather that, and they can gather that through a playful manner. So we do a lot of play-based learning approaches. But when we're working with children, and we may have volunteers who are from businesses, or we may have teachers who are trying to learn this new way of working, there's a key challenge we have with agency there and the power we want the children to have. I'm going to actually give a quote at the end of this because it will summarize it perfectly. But when you're working with a child, the way they design is not how you've learned to design in art school, obviously, because they're 7. But it's very pure, it's very unique, and it's very diverse. So we're constantly challenging how can we give them more agency by having more diversity in the way we run our programs, by giving space for, I guess, unpredictability, for flexibility, because that's what evokes change. That's what prevents you from having the same solution. And I'm not saying new. We often want innovation, and we say it's about having something new. Far from it. It's about having something that's a solution that really meets that need, and it's hopefully something that will sustain for the futures. And the way we work with the children is we also talk about agency in terms of what affects their lived experiences. So that's why we use play, because, obviously, I wish I was an adult and I played all the time, but I don't, unless I'm playing with my kids. So children play. So play is a key thing that's lived experience that they can design with. And we also, more recently, have started doing much more programs with sustainability. So we did one for COP26, and we looked at flooding and Thames flooding in Yorkshire, and we engaged them in the design process. And now we're doing one in London, a bit similar to some of the things Amahra was saying. We're looking at regenerative design, we're looking at AI, we're looking at them immersing themselves in that environment and engaging with technology in a manner that means that they are coming up with better solutions that are more probable and will be built. And that's agency. We design to build. We don't design to have a conversation. We don't design to have posters. I'm not saying that's bad. We want to build something that's going to affect your environment, bring spatial justice, bring climate justice that doesn't look like what you think it should be. So I'm going to give you a quote just to help summarize what I think is different about children. There's a lot of things. I'm not going to say what I'm saying is the best, but some of you may know Vygotsky. So Vygotsky was a bit like Piaget. Is that okay in French? It's okay. Piaget. Really famous child development scholar. He's a Russian, so he wasn't known as much. But if you look into his work, it's quite beautiful. It's from years ago. I think he died in the 1940s, so I won't bore you with my lecturing history. All right, so I'm going to just say it. The child does not distinguish between poetry and prose, narrative and dream. The child draws and tells story at the same time, plays theatre and creates text for the world on his own. It looks like play with a quick discharge of emotions. So going back to what I said about agency, and I guess agency could be similar to power, we do that through having projects where we're giving them design principles and methodologies and tools that are tactile, or they're audio, or they're just, again, playful, inclusive, and enabling them to do that. And we've done that through projects in London, in Birmingham, and Bristol, and the outcome is changing something in a physical environment, which is a play space.
Amazing, thank you. Arthur, so the village is obviously very focused on the environment and the climate. So for yourself, when you're designing new programs, what are some key factors that you try to focus on? And yeah, if you could give an example, that'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, sure. I think for us, what we realized is there are 2 times that we have to consider. There is a time of business that is inherently driven by the value of money. It's clear deadlines, it's very transactional, and you have to live within that world. The other part that is important is the time of communities, and we all know that designing with community takes a lot of time, and that's normal because the main things, the inherent value, it's relationship and trust. So you cannot just come and just say, cool, let's design a consultation program. It's going to be 2 days, and we're doing I'm going to ask 3 or 4 questions. I'm going to extract all of this and inform if I want. If it's not tokenistic, I'm going to be informing the things I'm doing. So for us, we realized that we've done an engagement program, but the engagement program was not just about these 2 to 3 days. We knew we needed to create some very clear parameters, and we didn't say to them, you should be informing X, Y, Z. We said, these usage are already designed. They are important for us to be living and sustaining our business over time, but we have created the conditions for you to inform and live in. So we decided they brought their own cups to the space. They decided to bring their own books, etc. Which what happens is suddenly the space was not a space that you come as a consumer, but it's a place that you co-design, but just in the way it feels, the way it looks. And we realized that people were always taking the favorite cup, even though they brought it to the space rather than keeping it at their home. But I think that's for me is the most important thing. Because you create this, they design kind of the things that we can allow in the time we have. And then what happened is we creating a feedback loop that was always on. So rather than coming and say, I've got a question to ask, the first thing we said is, hey, Sophie, how have you been doing? And we start to ask the question about their family, etc. And over time, we start to know them, and we start to create feedback loop about what's important for them, the things that we need to change, the things that they love and they want to do more of, etc., etc. And that feedback loop is the time you need in order to create true programs. This is the moment where they don't need to say, oh, let's all come to a room and chat. Because we all know there are power dynamics that exist. It's just like all of this, you become a catalyst to organize change inside of the environment you've built. And I think that's a very important thing that we've learned in the operations we had.
That's really amazing. I'm actually going to skip ahead to one of my questions just because it really jogged it. You know, I think you said that a lot about collaboration and building with communities is about trust and building those relationships. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to understand, you know, how do you see in terms of doing collaboration at scale with communities? How is that possible if it's such a one-to-one? And if this is something that we want to kind of proliferate?
That's a good question. I don't know yet. So I'm going to be differing with other people. We don't know yet. I think so far we've designed into one space and it's been successful at doing this. Now at scale, that's something that we need to learn. So happy to hear from the panel.
We actually lean on, I guess, existing processes. So because we work in schools or communities that are mainly marginalized, I guess what you'd call marginalized, that's a very contested term. We think about actually if we're going to believe that play, for example, in England right now, I think about 1 in 8 children don't have access to a green space in their house. You might not think that's a big deal. I grew up in the States. I think I'm pretty cool. I'm fine. But no, actually, in reality, it's affecting their well-being. It's affecting their development. And it mainly occurs in environments that are more deprived, where there's more need. So when we thought about how we can scale our program, we actually were quite... I don't know the word to use. We just used the system. We realized that a lot of businesses really care about social value, but before that, it was called corporate social responsibility, or it was called ESG, and we completely linked with that. They cared a lot about, I shouldn't say that, because hopefully people don't, I'm not saying in a bad way about businesses, it's still important. I'm not saying that businesses are bad, but you recognize that they wanted to work with their volunteers, they wanted to work with their teams to be seen to be doing good in these communities and actually also do good. So you felt the main way to scale was to work with these businesses, to work with these organizations, and now we work more with architects and we work with urban designers when we're doing like public tenders for projects. And we say we're going to provide a program where children or youth are going to go through a process where they're going to develop their design skills, they're going to be doing critical thinking, they're going to be doing problem solving. And that's like a way to sell something to different people who are in power financially to enable the people who are typically disempowered to be able to engage in the design process and through that design things that change the environment and kind of take the agency back, the agency that actually already was their own. Just to give an example, actually, I know we're going to give examples later, but there's a project in Myanmar, and it's basically a group of youth came to a space which was like a disused railway, and in that particular in that urban fabric of that part of the world, there's some alleyways that will have old railways in them. Sounds odd, but if you go online, it actually looks beautiful. And they realized that a lot of people were just throwing their rubbish into the area. So it's like really dirty, it was really messy. And then they collectively got some funding, similar mindset to what I've done, but in Myanmar, worked with a business, and then they funded money to be able to clear that space out and then make it look beautiful. Then they marketed it really well, got more funding from more companies. I think they've got like 160 railway tracks they've made into like playful spaces. It's that same mindset of realizing what sells and then using that to benefit your community. But that actually came from the community. The community themselves were able to design. They already knew what the problem is. They didn't need the business to give them like the problem and say, you've got this problem, I'm going to solve it for you. They knew it themselves. And we see ourselves more of a bridge. we recognise that in some communities with children, their voices are really not being heard. So our role is to really amplify their voices and enable their designs to get out there. So that's how we scaled.
That's amazing. And it seems like there's there's an incredible visual story behind that. And it seems like that was a very successful project. And I think I'd love to understand, for a lot of us that are trying to espouse and push more collaboration within communities and bring that into our work, I think we're often met against odds to show how do we demonstrate success in this. And I think this is, in my perspective, there's not really KPIs attached to this. So how do we measure success in this work? And what does success look like? And maybe, Amahra, I'll start with you.
Yay, I love this question so much because kind of on the scale, I could talk for 3 days about scale, 3 days about my granddad, 3 days about scale. The thing about scale for us is we, in the first instance, understand that the mission and the vision that our organisation has is not one that we hold alone. So therefore, we don't approach anything as though we are the singular entity that is going to solve this challenge or fix this thing or do this work. We see ourselves as a critical part of an ecology that is co-invested in a world towards liberation. So for us then, we said, well, our approach to scale is much more relational. So even that idea of how do we scale our work? Our work is about depth. Our work is literally about relationship. Our work is about, our work is we have demonstrators that we build in Birmingham. It's like these prototypes. We have a prototype space. We turned a 4-bedroom house in lockdown into a site of imagination. That is it's like my granddad's house, many things. It can be a rave if you want it to be. It's a community kitchen. It's a neighbourhood resource. We do a lot of mutual aid and resource redistribution there. We have artists in residence. Again, it's a 4-bedroom house, but it's many things to many people in the same way that my granddad's house is. And that to us was a demonstrator of us saying we build what we believe. One of my great inspirations, Diana Van Buren, the architect in the States, she said that we build what we believe, and I really took that very seriously. If we believe then that we don't want to replicate systems of harm, if we believe that we really want to unpack these supremacist defaults that we hold in this country, if we really believe in that, then what would we build? I was going to talk about 2 things at once, and I just wanted to talk. You touched on something, Arthur, about this kind of binary of to be an organisation and to kind of there are things that we have to do. I struggle with this contradiction all of the time, and I sense I'm not the only person who struggles with that. What we call due diligence, or what we call the things that we have to do. It always feels like a live site of contradiction. And one of the sites that I feel particularly about is fiscal accounting. Bear with me. So I was like, if we build what we believe, I have to go and report to HMRC or to Companies House, and I'm giving them a story of my organisation. Data is not, it's zeros and ones, but zeros and ones are story, right? Because I could very easily skew the data. We track, our year to year is January to December. We also track April to April because some of our funders want the data in that way. Those accounts tell 2 completely different stories of our organisation. Sometimes we're in the red, sometimes we're in the green, right? It's just a story. So I was like, well, if fiscal accounting is a story, what's a more life-affirming story that we could tell about our organisation? And we took this into how would we co-create a new practice with our community, as in residents in Ladywood in Birmingham, where we are, and artists. How would we co-create a new practice at the intersection of art, design and accounting? What would that look like? We gave it a name. We called it Graph. We rehearsed it into being. We started with a residency, and essentially we had to build out a vocabulary. In creating that vocabulary, we started with what do we care about, what do we believe in, what are we advocating for. So in that we kind of learned, we almost taught ourselves, we gave ourselves new metrics. Sometimes we have to, we're partially funded by public money. Sometimes we might have to say how many people came to the event or what the demographics are of the people in our community. But I also want space to talk about how was love present in the room. Sometimes we have to talk about, what we're doing around our carbon offsetting. And that's cool. But I want to talk about how much do we center around more than human accountabilities, because this human-led, human we're recreating these supremacist ideals that the human is over here and everything else is over there. That's not the relationship that we wanted to be in. So we tried to create a language that can accommodate for the tangible elements of our work as much as the intangible. Yes, these people are in our community and we work with them, and the impact might look like this in that way, but also, can we place our ancestors in our impact? Can we place our neighbours? Can we place the local council who doesn't want to work or can't afford to, doesn't want to work with us? Can we place them in this ecology? And that work then, we started to redesign our company structure as not like a top-down, a hierarchy like this where power and agency trickle down. And we didn't want to flip it in reverse, which somebody still has to be at the bottom for it to work. Can we have a company structure that is alive, that allows for things to break and blow up and acknowledges, earlier people were talking about change. Octavia Butler says the only lasting truth is change. What if we design an organisation as though that were true? How could we have a governance structure that acknowledges death and aliveness and movement and never stagnant, So we designed a solar system structure where we say the CEO is not at the center of this universe, the mission is. So what would it mean if we organized around mission and we built teams and constellations and distributed leadership around the mission, not around hierarchy in that way?
So I'm going to quickly follow up on that. Just talking a little bit about, I guess, decolonization. UCL did some great work at the Bartlett on decolonization. And decolonization, I guess, similar to co-design, it's more people's mind more and more. But some of the things that they spoke about was decolonizing knowledge production. It's not just UCL, but decolonizing knowledge production and decolonizing methods. And I think that brings back to some of the things you were saying, like the methodology we're using to even assess what is good quality community engagement came often from a colonialist system. And then the people who were colonized, I'm just being honest, who may be from a BME background, then need to speak to that language. And that's a problem. So I think that's the thing that some of the work we do, I personally do, is more of activist and research. So I teach. And when I teach, I speak this language to students because in reality, we can't keep on having these same systems of impact and evaluation. I'm an engineer. Yeah, it's great statistically. I'm sure it speaks the right language to some people, but it's not empowering groups who just need a play space, who just need to feel like they belong. I guess it's just not useful. And just quickly speaking to knowledge production, I'd really encourage everyone in the audience is just to look at the open source academic literature, because there's so much literature out there that even gives you methodologies you could adopt in the work you're doing. So when you're producing knowledge with a community, is that whole thing, you're co-producing knowledge, you're giving them the ability to say things they already knew, communicate it, amplify it, and other people themselves can learn from it. It's a two-way knowledge transfer. I could talk about this forever, but yeah, I just wanted to really highlight, look into that area.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it actually leads into a question that I really wanted to touch on, because I think, Amahra, you touched on this, and Arthur, I'd love to know from yourself, you're all kind of pioneers in what you're doing and you're building something new. And so I'd love to know, what is the system that you're creating or trying or aspiring to create through the work that you're doing and the design and the building of what you're doing?
Big question. So, as I said earlier, so I like always to, when we are in this panel conversation, is to look at the system we have designed. Universities, and mostly the design we create, is all about talking through a power dynamic. We're here with the experts, by the way, you are listening. So, there is always a design that makes you feel something, makes you feel small, makes you feel big, etc. And we always have to think, and when we move through space, we always, in the different places that we have, and from my corporate background, going to a big meeting room, a fancy office, makes you feel that you just are a little shit. But you're just here asking for money. So all of these are design structures and they are power structures. So the way we always think is like, okay, if we design a space, how can we design a space that do not make you feel small? So this we talk about earlier with this idea of inclusivity, welcoming spaces. The way we try to design a space for us is to keep this in mind. So I talked about earlier we just ask people to bring things that they like or things that they just want to get rid of. We painted the entire room in a green tone that makes people feel very much at ease compared to other tones. And I remember people coming to the space like, wow, this color is beautiful. I feel so much peace in here. I was like, okay, great, we've done something well. And I think for us was, so always everything we created, it was, you talked about things are imperfect. So we've done, everything we created was upcycled. Nothing was straight. And that was somewhat by design, because anything that is straight is not human. It's very human, it's not natural. So you straight away feel a bit like uptight. So everything was a bit mid-mash. Colors was not perfect. Things was a bit destroyed left and right. It feels coordinated, it feels very welcoming, and it doesn't feel like it was just full of crap. But it just created that sense of peace and very sense of what all human beings know by heart is that inherent sense of chaos. So you just arrive and it feels, oh, I know where to go, I know where to land, but I feel peace. And for us, we discussed about metrics. It's a metric that we never used any funding application. But we saw where we've done something right when people were removing their shoes and putting their feet on the sofa. And we're like, okay, we created a great place for people just to be. And I think for us, that's kind of the way we're trying to think about the space that we design.
That's amazing. I think I love this idea of really focusing on, inclusivity when you're designing this. And I think I'd like to speak a bit more about, how do we champion and prioritize bringing in diverse perspectives in the work that we do? And alongside that, because I feel like we're going to take questions from the audience in a second, but I really want to get this in. Alongside that, I spoke earlier about how, this term co-design, we're hearing a lot of it, and it's in so many grant funding applications. And I often find that it's usually just a one-way conversation. And I'd love to understand, how do we make it more of a dialogue, especially when projects are sustained over longer periods of time? How do we ensure that it's not extractive or exploitative and that we're constantly feeding back? Does anybody want to start off?
I just have a very sorry, babes.
Sure, go for it.
I feel like you can't do that without relationship. And part of what my concern is in spaces where we talk about community is that everything kind of gets lumped in with that term of so basically I think we conflate audience with community. I think we conflate neighbour. I think we conflate spectator, someone who follows us on Instagram, someone who buys our books. I think we're just bunging that term into community and we're not being very honest about that. So in short, I want to say you can't do that kind of depth work, that honest work, that work with integrity, never mind to be in genuine co-design without relationship, which means that we have to be very specific and very honest. Relationships are consensual, as in we know that we are in them, we are calling one another community. That should be the starting point. They should be reciprocal. And if we're not in those dynamics, and those things do take time, and I really encourage that. I encourage that we don't rush to make everyone our community and we try shortchange some shit so that we can say we've done the co-design. If it takes time and you haven't got the capacity for time, just don't call it co-design. That's fine. I'd just rather we be honest.
I agree.
And just the definition is numerous definitions for co-design, but one of the key ones that people use is it's design that when you work with people with lived experiences or system stakeholders, so the ones that are affected by it. So if you're doing that and you recognize if you're working, here we go, I don't know, this water cup. So if we're going to, water jug. If we're going to design for people affected by water jugs, we can design for people who can afford a certain form of water jug, and you'd only design with them, and those would be the people in the affected system. You may work with people who wanted a water jug for school, so therefore you work with the affected. It may be not just the children, it may also be the dinner ladies, the different people who are affected. And then when you think about that in like a stakeholder map, you then have to think, who is disempowered? And then prioritize them. That's what I would say. You value the diversity in the affected system stakeholders for your particular product, then think about the voices that are not being heard and get data from them. And in reality, if you care about innovation, you want something new, it's useful to get those voices in the first place.
Yeah, and focus on those that aren't in the conversation as it is.
Yeah, and then also making sure that the systems, I'm going to say this again, but the systems you've got in place really enable them to engage in the design and not become informants or become testers, but they're your design partners. And you actually have to, similar to what Rosie said, you have to, and also Mara, you have to be humble. You have to get rid of your ego and say they're your design partners. They weren't heard. Now you've got a platform.
Amazing. Arthur, do you have anything to add to that before we go to... Amazing. Should we go to questions from the audience?
Anybody here? I'll go to the online comments first. So many claps and applauses, particularly for the sort of beautiful answer there on the relational approach to scale. So Gaith asked, they would love to hear more from Amahra about the work they're doing with built environment justice, especially regarding how they start the work. What do participants think they're doing at first? And how do you navigate the journey of world building without the industry jargon?
Yay. I must add, I come from a long line of fugitives. Like I have, my family are from Jamaica, and they were actively conspiring in the dark and out loud and openly to like kind of do this, kind of, we're going to do this for you, but really we're doing this radical organizing over here. Like that is my literal lineage. And Irish, so, you know, I had no choice but to be a fiery somebody. I'm kind of talking from two different perspectives. With the Black Land and Spatial Justice Project specifically, that I've now moved that into a design studio, but the origins of that in 2020, we were watching the Colston statue being torn down in Bristol, and it felt like the first time that I'd seen a very public conversation, a very open conversation about the public realm, race, and structural violence in this country in my lifetime. And I've had a very different experience. I've grown up in Handsworth, and I've seen it in close proximity, but on a mainstream scale, it was the first time. And so I very naively set out with a campaign to raise £30,000 to redistribute back to other organised and visionaries who were doing work specifically around land and spatial justice, and they were black leaders. And that project kind of took on a life where it was like, I don't just want to there has to be something that's about more than money. I think I'm always interested in reparations as a concept. Where reparations loses me is when we enter into conversations where it's just about, we need to get the money, we need to give it to the... Money is a part to play, but if we're thinking about, again, I'm from Jamaica, my islands probably aren't going to be there, in immediate lifetimes, right? So what is reparations when our homelands aren't there anymore? What will money mean when you can no longer trade it for anything? So for me, there's whole swathes of conversations and work that I've been doing there that started off a practice lab, essentially. And I went into, some reason I keep ending up in universities. I don't know what happens, but I remember having a conversation with the architecture school in Birmingham. They were really interested in like fugitivity and in a lot of the work that I was doing. And I said, I really want to develop something around abolition. I really want to use this idea of imagining a world without prisons and all of the visceral responses that gives. I want to give it space to the students who are here. And what tools, what things, what materials, what inspiration can we like add to grow that? And so we basically were talking about TV shows that we love as a starting point to engage with a world without prisons. We talked a lot about The Wire. We talked a lot about Insecure. But that was one thing. And I don't think we have time for any more, but basically I could talk for days about the actual starting points.
Well, you've had a lot of applauses online. I'll tell you that. And then one more from the phones as well. Our old friend Anonymous asks, any advice for people wanting to initiate community work without the necessary relationships to do so effectively? And additionally, in knowing that relationship building takes time, how do we go about doing this without imposing ourselves?
I think one of the key things is that again, I'm a very honest person. I'm Black British Nigerian. So you might assume if I go into a Black British Jamaican community, I can build relationships, I can talk about something that we all relate with. In reality, I don't have that much of advantage than other people. I spend a lot of time to understand. We work with children, I'm not a child. Understanding is the priority, in my opinion, in relation with work, is understanding, recognizing that you're not going to fully know their experiences, but you'll find things that you can relate with, empathize for, and see your place in that relationship. Because you're not going to have your norms of being the same. You have to value your diversity, want to understand what's going on, and then engage. And then again, I keep on bringing it back to power. If I then have a form of power that can amplify a voice there, I literally take it. I take it any opportunity I can to build that relationship, but also add more value to more than having a conversation. Because again, I'm an engineer. I feel like things should be done. We should make things. There's children of ideas that can consider climate change, can think about overheating in their environment. They live on an estate in Peckham. What can they do? They've got a park, a green space they're not using. They're thinking about these solutions. How can I amplify it? Build a relationship with them, but then as an adult, I amplify it.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add to this, I think, is going with a very humble approach. We are living in Tower Hamlets, and we've done the village in Acton, so very different communities with a different spectrum. And what we realized is coming with a humble approach and trying to learn from them was the best way to do this in somewhat short amount of time.
I'll just add very quickly, MAIA is 10 years old, and for 1 year, we didn't do anything but just show up. Literally just show up. Other organizations, other peers, other, people who are already doing stuff. Where is there an existing pulse to work with? Sometimes it's about just showing up. Sometimes I think we make that assumption that we have to be the ones to start the thing. And more I'm longing for spaces where it's like, I never wanted to start an organization, by the way, and I've regretted it ever since, but I just wanted a job, couldn't get one. But more and more I'm just like, I think that we just have to show up with each other's work and show up with what already exists.
And just touching on that, I think when you show up, it's being happy to be uncomfortable and disrupting the experiences you thought you would have, and be happy to experience what you have there. And for in designers, design thinking, I often talk about things that are models that people might not really necessarily all agree with, but design thinking starts with empathy. Whatever you believe in that model, it's that whole, what do you need to be able to have empathy? You need to be able to understand, you need to be humble. You need to be able to have patience and really engage. And even just the design principles we learn as designers tell us the solution. They tell us to answer the question we're asking.
And I think just before we close, I know that there was a lot of calls to action really baked into a lot of your answers. Are there any final words or calls to action, other than obviously checking out all the work that you do and following it all, which I will? Any final parting?
Final one for me, can we be really honest about, one, the built environment's relationship to the climate collapse? 2 is, where can we centre land in the conversation? How do we move from giving a sense of ownership into actively moving space, land into different kinds of community stewardship? Where can we be honest about that?
I think for me, just one that came to my mind was keep playing. And I didn't even go into a play background that much, but play I see as a space for people who have a different mindsets, different values, different ages to come together and be like on a theatre stage, but it's not a theatre stage, it's the playground. So keep looking for spaces to play, play is inclusion, interaction, engage with people in these challenging conversations about the community, about climate change, and think about climate change similar to play, not just the lens of actually there's overheating going on here or there's flooding. You have so many different, spheres of consideration we can think about for climate change, and it's a playful way of approaching things that are more, inclusive and more exploratory and more experiential.
Amazing.
And so more social. That's very important.
I don't have anything as clever as you said. I think for me, I think I'm going to refer back to the words that Katie uses. It's community work and collaboration, and anything that's done is a roller coaster. It goes up and down. It's really particularly difficult, and it can take quite an emotional toll, specifically for founders and CEOs and MDs that are creating that kind of work. But I think it's remembering the change that we're bringing, and also I think having this stubborn optimism, I think for me was, you opened something in me today with this, and I think it's always keeping this in mind, because you will go down and you will go up, and reminding yourself that you have an impact and surrounding yourself with people that can help you go up and down with you, and help you, it's something that is very important.
Great.
Love it. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for joining us.
Thank you.